All right, let's jump right into it. Thank you, everybody, for attending episode 38 in Let's Talk Recruiting. Today, our topic is sort of a conversation of a much broader conversation that's only been amplified here in 2020, even though it has been going on for some years, in my opinion. Been part of a few programs over the years, going back to 2007 when I was the first diversity program I was part of. So it's a long, enduring program. I think we're going to see some more advancements happen in a more urgent manner, knock on wood, fingers crossed. Today, so our topic is how to tell if your company has a diversity issue. So first step in addressing a problem is defining the problem. So you have to know if you have one or not. I will add that our panels that we have been doing over the weeks here have kind of been ad hoc topics. I'm going to make D&I, maybe it's DE and I now. That's one thing that we can cover at some point as to what is the right label or what can we all agree to, but make it more of an ongoing conversation. So at least once a month, have a panel where we're discussing this. So it's not just a conversation that we had and we leave it alone, but something we can keep coming back to. With us today on our session, how to tell if your company has a diversity issue, Christina Sharif. Did I get the last name right, Christina?
Yep, that's right.
Excellent. She's with us out of the Los Angeles area, where I am also out of. Andy Marchetti out of Boston, Allie Burton out of Seattle, and Andy Edmondson out of Portland. So what we're going to do is each panelist has sort of a topic they want to cover, and we're going to kind of do a round table and go through those. For the audience members, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to add those into the chat area. And panelists, if those start to come in, any help in sort of covering those is appreciated. Sometimes I get lost in the conversation. So Christina, we're going to start with you. Do you want to start off with your item?
Sure, of course. Good morning. Thank you so much. I'm Christina Sharif. Just a little bit about myself. Started off my career in law, didn't love it, so switched over to HR, and I've been in the HR space for the better part of 12 years now. Have experience in large conglomerates supporting 2,000 employees in Latin America, and then also have experience sort of heading up the HR function for smaller groups like 100. So a lot of variance in what I've seen in the D&I space in both of those areas. In my most recent role, I was responsible for leading both the talent acquisition and diversity and inclusion efforts for Valence Media, which is an entertainment conglomerate consisting of the brands Hollywood Reporter, Billboard Music, Dick Clark Productions, and MRC Studios. So that's just a little bit about my background. I thought it might be a good idea to start off today's conversation with just sort of coming up with a definition around the differences between diversity and inclusion. And I feel like lately this has gotten a lot more airplay than it used to. And so I feel like a lot of people are more on the same page about the differences. But the way that I liken it is always diversity is you're having a party, and you make an effort to make sure that everybody's at the party, which is great, right? But inclusion is once people are at the party, does everyone have a drink in their hand? Is everyone participating in the games, right? Does everyone, more importantly, know how to play the games? Is everyone familiar with pin the tail on the donkey? Or, are we just sort of marginalizing groups by assuming that they are, and so assuming that they don't want to play if they're not participating, versus not understanding that they might not have had the opportunity and access to learn how to play those games. So for me, that's sort of just the easiest way to tell the difference between diversity and inclusion. And in today's workplace, what I've seen is that, especially on the recruiting side, there's a natural marriage between diversity and recruiting, right? We can set numbers. We can talk to hiring managers about the diverse slate of candidates that we'd like to present, and tell our teams about what we expect out of the searches. But then there's that other piece of, once folks are in the building, how are we able to retain that talent? And most of that boils down to the inclusion part. And I think, what most people don't realize is that the word inclusion does not even translate in all languages. And I think that's sometimes why it's difficult for us, even in the US, to sort of put our finger on exactly what that means. But the word that does translate into all languages that I feel is most closely signified of inclusion is belonging. Right. So how do we make everyone feel like they belong here? And for me, and what I've told my both the executive team and the hiring managers is, when you walk into a room, no matter what room that is, and no matter what kind of meetings you're having, when you look around the room, is that room reflective of the real world? And if the answer to that is no, then you probably have a diversity problem. I've seen it happen at the lower levels and at the higher levels, but truth be told, a lot of times we have more turnover at the lower levels. So when we're trying to meet diversity numbers, many times it's easier to meet those numbers at like the assistant level or coordinator levels where we're having more turnover. And then at those executive levels, then it starts, like, especially when you're first starting your D&I program, it looks kind of imbalanced, right? Like you have all of these diverse workplace at the lower levels, and then the upper levels still look very much the same, which brings in its own dangers. So I can't emphasize the importance of bringing in people at the executive level that are going to lead these teams, that also come from diverse backgrounds. And we're not only talking about gender or nationality, we're also talking about where they've gone to school, where they grew up, because thought diversity is just as important, and it's really what's reflected right in these all these other categories of diversity. Studies have shown that when you have a group of people in a room that have marginal differences, right? They've gone to the same school or similar schools, they've grown up in the same areas, etc. You're only going to make decisions that are marginally different than decisions you would have made on your own, which is sort of against the whole point, right? So if you or your hiring managers are hiring folks that feel like a cultural fit, which a lot of times means that they feel good to me, they feel the same, they feel like we could go get a drink together, they feel, if you're hiring for cultural fit versus a values fit, a lot of times eventually there's a possibility of ending up with a diversity issue, because everybody's going to think the same and everybody's going to have sort of the same viewpoint on things, whether or not they look different.
Christine, let me ask you a question about look around the room. Is there diversity? What are your thoughts when you go have a conversation with an executive where you can come and show numbers, to your point, executive level or senior manager level, where, hey, I'm not looking in the room, I'm looking at the numbers and I see we have a problem. But the response from that executive is, I don't have a diversity issue, look around, because the work group that is literally in line of sight is diverse. Any thoughts around that when the look around the room, you're literally seeing a certain population, right? But it's that broader scope, kind of like I don't know if rebuttal is the right word, but thoughts on that when the numbers don't reflect what you see?
Sure. I think the numbers do tell a story, right? So it's more than just the numbers across the entire organization, but it's really important to delve a little bit deeper, again, to see, okay, so maybe the admin staff or manager and below, the numbers are incredibly high, but then once we get above that manager level, the numbers go down significantly. So then we can expect to see that if you're in a meeting with assistants, you might feel the false sense of security that you don't have a diversity issue. But what's really important is to take sort of the average. So go into several different meetings. And that's why it's important not to only take sort of the temperature in one isolated situation, because the numbers will also tell where those gaps are. Even outside, and one of the other reasons why it's just so important to delve a little bit deeper is that, so we talk about diversity within an organization, but then if we look at some of the broader issues, right? Let's say an organization's gender diversity is off, where it's mostly male, and we're working on getting the female population sort of up to bar. But then we look at assistants. And if we look at assistant administrative positions across the board and not organizationally only, we would see that between 73 and 75% of admins are women. So in that case, even though there's a broader male population at that particular company, it might make sense to have more males in the administrative area, and then really work on more women in the executive area, et cetera, where not only do those numbers reflect a gap organizationally, but also as an industry and as a sort of a human population. So it's important to really dig deeper and not make assumptions or have a false sense of security off of one or two reflections in a meeting.
Excellent. Were you going to bring up the talent pool piece around the external talent pools?
No, which is also really important, right? So how do we retain people at diverse levels across the board, right? And of course, having a diverse talent pool is really important. And I think that somebody else is going to get a little more into this, so I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. But making sure that we're recruiting from places that are focused on diverse talent. For me, one of the biggest changes that we made within our organization are the schools that we recruit from, because it really starts from the beginning, right? If you are running an internship program and your interns are all coming generally from the same schools every year, or the interns that you hire, so the applicants are coming from the same schools, and then the interns that you hire sort of look the same, sound the same, you can guarantee that you have a diversity issue, because it's starting literally from the very beginning, where it's almost easiest to find people, because we're not looking for very skilled folks right at this level. So it's not like we have the excuse that there's, it's a data scientist, there's only a certain amount in the country, right? So if you have a problem at your internship level, you can almost guarantee you're going to have a problem permeating the other levels. But one of the most sort of influential and small changes that we made was we said, look, we're recruiting from the same 10 schools every year. We can continue to recruit from those schools, but instead of just doing our same rigmarole that we're doing every year, I want to talk to the student groups within those schools, the diverse student groups. And I want to make sure that even within these schools, these diverse groups are aware of the opportunities. And it really changed the trajectory of the interns that were applying. And then in addition to that, we also added HBCUs. So we developed really close relationships with schools like Howard University. And then we talked about bringing in Spelman and Morehouse, and sort of adding a few schools that were really focused on diverse talent, but also going to the variety of diverse student groups within the schools that we were already recruiting from. So that's one thing, right? So interns come in, if they see that they're the only intern that has any kind of diversity, they're going to run from the hills and they're not going to work for you later, right? So once people are actually in the door permanently, we have to make sure that we're creating programs for mentorship, hiring, make sure that that our diverse populations are included in the training programs, right? Are we not just sort of picking on the same people over and over to participate in stretch assignments, to get more visibility amongst executives, things like that? And in addition to creating employee resource groups, which is usually not like an HR function, but more of a grassroots function that comes from employees. But as the recruiting team and on the HR team, we do have a vested interest in making sure that these groups are guided and they have the resources so that employees feel like they have an opportunity to provide education to the larger organization, and also to be with like-minded people.
Do you think for like defined recruiting efforts for diversity, defined inclusiveness, just to try and be able to put something on the drawing board, like having resource groups or employee resource groups, or having the availability of support there, is the lack of those things kind of for a medium to large size business, right? Small businesses, hey, we're just trying to stay in business. I get that. But once you get to medium and large size, the lack of those defined efforts, is that kind of a sign, maybe not that you necessarily have a diversity issue, but there's a lack of awareness of diversity?
Sure. Maybe you're a little bit tone deaf to what the needs are for diverse populations. And, for people on the side of the table that are naturally going to sort of feel left out unless there are these intentional efforts, we know that it's really a systemic issue. And so the solutions have to be systemic. They have to be a part of a defined process, an intentional effort. And, for so long, I think that companies just said, yeah, well, it's a focus of ours, but. And when it's not defined and intentional, there's so many things that can sort of come between what the intention is and then also what the action actually is, right? And the accountability is. And so by adding these defined efforts, although to your point, Sean, it's not necessarily a red flag, absolute sign that there is a diversity issue. What I can almost guarantee is that if there's not one today, there will be, because natural human nature makes excuses for what we can't do immediately, even if not on purpose, right? Even if it just becomes, well, look, we need these positions filled quickly. And so we're going to hire our friend who we knew from a past company, and they hire their friends, and then they hire their friends, which happens, way more often than we'd like to lend attention to. And so everyone's sort of hiring folks that they know. And before you know it, we're all thinking the same. We all look kind of the same. We come from the same schools. And so without that intentional sort of reflection and those intentional programs, even if it's not today, the likelihood is that there will be an issue later.
A significant business impact too, right? I mean, I think that's where we go often with our executives and leaders, because it's not just the right thing to do, but it's actually going to make you more money, make the organization more productive, more profitable.
Andrew, or anything to add to Christina's? I didn't mean to hog the conversation there.
No, that's fine. I just agree with everything you've said, and I really want to highlight that you mentioned is the distinction between a culture fit versus a values fit. I just can't overstress that. I mean, we hear that so often as a reason to disqualify a candidate. And I haven't heard it phrased that way before, and I'll absolutely use that. So that was a really good distinction. So
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on what Christina has said about that sense of belonging. What I was thinking about was building the environment where you have trust and you can actually bring issues up. And I was concerned, like when we're talking about places that don't have that channel or that pathway for someone to raise issues, that's when things start to sort of bubble underneath the surface. And then you see it in your retention data showing everyone's leaving and you're not talking about it. So you need to have that ability for people to bring things up, in an environment where it's trusted, where they can feel safe to bring those up and know that leadership's going to address it or leadership's going to respond. And that's one of the things that at Stoll Reeves, I think we're doing really well this year in an environment that's extremely complicated, and our employees are looking for action at this time, and so that's been our focus, is how we build trust and how we build a way for that. We have a diversity DE&I committee, but we're giving them the voice, and leadership is supporting them in that.
Good. Christina, I didn't mean to cut you off or anything. Did you have more to add?
No, not at all. I did want to mention one thing that I sort of saw when we were reviewing some of the topics that folks wanted to hear about today, and just some of sort of their ideas around what are red flags to them that there's a diversity issue. And one of the things that came up sort of continuously was that numbers don't lie. And that's sort of true, right? It's so important to have the data, and that's definitely a prime indicator. But I just want to share one quick thing from my experience, and hopefully it encourages all of us to dig 2 or 3 levels deeper. So I was working at a very large media conglomerate, and I was working for the Latin American department. So essentially I was supporting 6 Latin American countries and the Latin America region here in the US, which was mostly in Miami. And if you looked at the numbers, if you were even just looking at the US numbers and you counted everybody that was working in the Latin America department in Miami, you would say, yep, we have a great Latin American population, and, people of color, we're doing okay, right? But what we didn't sort of focus on is 3 levels deeper, which is that diversity in other areas of the world looks very different than it does in the US. And we can't really apply the same nationality, religion, gender, those type of things internationally that we do in the US. Because if I go to the office in Mexico City, for example, 99.9% of the people there are Mexican, right? So nationality is not necessarily a standard for diversity there. But we brought in a high-level executive from Brazil to work out of the Miami office, which was prior to that a pretty diverse office, meaning that we had a lot of Cubans, we had a lot of people from Puerto Rico, we had, it was just a pretty diverse office. But once we brought in the executive from Brazil, he started hiring people that he was comfortable with, and their friends, and all of them were Brazilian. And before you knew it, in a very short period of time, and we're talking 6 months or less, the entire dynamic of that Miami office changed. Many people were speaking Portuguese. The people that spoke Spanish didn't understand the people that spoke Portuguese. A lot of the culture of the office began to be more Brazilian instead of more diverse. And still in the US, if we were just looking at the numbers, we would have said, oh, we have a Brazilian executive, we have even more, people of color there, without sort of looking 3 steps deeper and saying, yes, but most people here are Brazilian, and the balance is starting to become off in those areas. So, the only thing that I would say is that numbers absolutely tell the story, but it's what's in between the pages of the story that really writes the book. And it's important for us to just dig a little bit deeper sometimes into the complexities of diversity.
I think somebody's going to steal that phrase from you too. It's a really interesting way to look at it.
I'm going to write it down right now.
Yeah, I would typically use that connecting the dots, right? The story behind the story. Yeah, that's an interesting piece to it. And like in recruiting, you can get down to almost every rec has a story behind it, and how the teams evolve through hiring or transfers or promotions. I am a numbers guy. I always with the numbers, but to your point, yeah, they come with a story though. And let's start asking questions, not just lay out the numbers. Even just around the sense of inclusion. I mean, I can give you all the headcount reports and applicant funnel reports you want, but I don't know how to measure whether somebody feels included or not. Those types of numbers. So it's all part of a story, but not one alone. Excellent, Christina. Appreciate that. And any other comments you want to add to Christina or Andrew? We can jump over to you. Okay, Andrew, let's jump over to you and to your items. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Sure. So what I wanted to talk about today is, really my experience working with large organizations, and Christina hit the nail on the head with kind of where I'm going with this is diversity is a lot more nuanced than I think people often give it credit for. In a large organization, typically you'll have a corporate structure, you'll have business units or lines of business that report up into that corporate structure. And diversity means different things to different areas. Corporate will typically have certain goals. Our business areas will have certain goals. And often I work for XPO Logistics. I lead technology recruiting for XPO Logistics. And, in our supply chain organization, which is basically warehousing, diversity means a different thing than it does in technology as far as, the goals we're striving for and the balance we're trying to create. One thing that jumped out to us recently was really just basically inconsistent results. Some areas we're doing really well. Other areas, the needle's not moving. And kind of when we dug into it, what we found is that recruiters were a little bit overwhelmed and somewhat confused because we have, some areas of our business are government contractors. So we have mandatory affirmative action placement goals that we have to pay attention to. Corporate has aspirational goals that they want us focused on. Each business area, and in some cases on a site-by-site basis, has diversity goals that they want to focus on. And recruiters just really weren't sure what was what and what they were focused on. So they kind of, just went to the mindset of we're presenting, diverse slates of candidates and hopefully it'll take care of itself. And you know, as we all know, that type of approach does not ever take care of itself. So really, we had to dig in more deeply. And the key really is to come up with a more cohesive diversity and inclusion strategy that extends beyond recruiting. So, I mean, first and foremost, recruiters have to understand kind of, you know, what those goals are, what we're trying to achieve. But also a lot of work is required with hiring leaders. You know, I mean, Christina touched on it. And I think everyone who's ever been a recruiter or an HR professional has dealt with it. You know, we hire in our own image, right? We like people who think like us, who have backgrounds like us. And not always because people are bigoted or anything like that, but more just from a human nature perspective, that makes sense. We understand that, you know, that typically resonates with us when someone has mind share. So, and in addition, really building bridges with human resources to focus on the inclusion part, because recruiting, Sean, as you tapped into, we don't have a lot of insight into the inclusion piece. We want to make good hires. We want people to come in and fit in well. But we're really not in a position to monitor, measure, work on that, coach around that. So really the biggest game changer for us was making sure we had that cohesive strategy, that recruiters knew what their role was, hiring leaders understood kind of what the goals were, why we're seeking those goals, and the better business performance piece really is a big help. There's a lot of documentation out there, and that tends to get executives on board pretty quickly. But really just building out that cohesive strategy, as opposed to, because you can have a lot of people with good intentions trying to do the right thing, working kind of in silos and vacuums, and maybe having an impact in certain areas. But when you pull back and look at the whole, you're not achieving the results you'd like to, you know, you're attempting to achieve. So really that cohesion, communication, education, you know, I think up until relatively recently, a lot of organizations I've been a part of have been in favor of diversity, but there's almost a reluctance or sensitivity to dig into it too much. There's almost like an uncertainty principle mindset going on. Like the more we dive into it and measure it, the more we may affect it or create our own bias. Or so there's been kind of a standoffishness there that I think recent events has kind of helped wipe away. That no, we need to look at these things and we need to look at the data. We need to understand where we are. So just my 2 cents, and really it applies more to large organizations, but those are some of the pitfalls that I've seen, you know, in my experience.
Andy, let me sort of add to that piece with kind of a question. You talked about the elevation or the education, right? To me, like the elevation is probably a bigger picture goal for not just one company to address, but as a country to address and employers to address. I've been running diversity reports for a company lately. It's on the top of radars. It is just about every place. And one of the questions was this. So they're trying to create diversity around software engineering and developers. The question was posed, hey, if I go out and recruit a software developer from company X and bring them over to my company, yes, I'm increasing diversity in my company, but is that doing anything for the greater good? Because now I just decreased their diversity, but increased mine. So is it just to recruit talented, or is it about developing and elevating the talent? And how can, and this is the recruiting team asking, how can we do anything to that? Just a sort of a big picture philosophy. Kind of back to the panel around that. What are your thoughts around that about, hey, not just hiring the existing talent, but doing something, I don't know what it is, to increase and elevate the talent to get to those levels? I have no idea what the answer is.
Well, sorry, I'll jump in and answer it first, but it's interesting you say that, because we noticed something similar when we were looking at our data. Is, you know, manager and below, we're doing great. You know, we'd like to do better, but we're doing pretty well. It's that manager and above level where where we really need to do some work. And in my opinion, my comment was, well, that tells me that we don't have strong management training programs. And the other interesting part of that was the diversity piece was just kind of the first indicator. When we looked in more deeply, that extended across the board. We tend to go out and hire new people for management positions as opposed to promote from within. Not always, but in a statistically disproportionate way. So that was what jumped out at me. And I know our human resource organization kind of had the same thoughts and are working on building those things out. But I don't think that's an uncommon problem, and that could be one indicator.
Anything from other panelists?
Yeah, I'd like to sort of piggyback on what Andy mentioned. And for me, it's three things. So I think initially, yeah, you're right. It doesn't do anything for the greater good just to sort of transfer talent. But look, as recruiters, we do that all the time anyway. Like, right, even if it's not.
Got to earn the paycheck.
Like,
the
I
hustle is real.
I need the talent. I think the difference comes into like hiring and then mentoring and promoting, right? So if we take the diversity thing just out for 2 seconds, employees stay in places where they feel like they're growing, even if it's not always sort of a vertical jump. If they feel like they're growing horizontally as people and professionally, they're more likely to stay. We need to make sure that our diverse populations are actively part of these groups that we're mentoring and promoting, though, right? That's the first thing for me. And the second thing beyond that is, okay, so we've brought talent in, but how do we also, again, as Andy said, create management programs that are really solid? But also, can we talk about transferable skills just for a second, right? So, because a lot of times with hiring managers, they want a candidate that checks all of the boxes. I've seen it happen a million times, especially in newsrooms. But in order sometimes to check all of their boxes, it means that they want people with all of the same experiences and opportunities that they've had. And so we just end up regenerating the same talent over and over again. And what I always say to hiring managers is we have to think about the 6-month mark here. Okay, so you bring in somebody that doesn't necessarily have all of the boxes checked, but they do have all of the hard skills that are necessary for the position, and enough smarts and enough of the values fit to really get caught up in 6 months. In 6 months from now, right, you'll have someone who's over the learning curve, and your newsroom, for example, will look different, feel different, be reporting on different things if you go with this candidate. But in 6 months from now, if you get somebody that checks all the boxes, sure, you'll have a really short learning curve, but nothing will have changed beyond 6 months. So it's important for us to really think about hiring outside of the box when it comes to skills that are transferable, and to really help hiring managers understand the benefit that sort of other things might bring to the table versus just checking every single box on the rec.
I'd like to add to that too, because actually what I'm seeing is for the people that you take that chance on and they have more to learn and develop and to fully grasp the role, you're seeing a longer curve on engagement in that function. So you hire someone that's been doing it for 5-10 years. Within that first year, they're saying, okay, I'm done with this. I'm looking, what's my next step? You bring in that person that's seeing the challenge and learning new activities, you're extending that time that they'll be engaged in the role.
All right, fantastic. Andrew, back to your original topic around knowing where you stand with things. In addition with making D&I an ongoing conversation, we're starting another little series or channels around, recruiting by the numbers, knowing your numbers. Getting back to that diversity, I was focusing on developers. Hey, our applicants, 20% are diverse. Hey, Sean, is that good or bad? I don't know. I can tell you if we've increased or decreased. I'd have to look at companies in your area for looking for that, whether that's good or bad. So I think having conversations around and having companies, without disclosing too much information, but kind of sharing, what is doing it right? What is, hey, you got a lot of room for improvement. not just within your walls. So I think having that external conversations about, hey, well, we're at 45% diversity for developers. Dang, what are you doing? Because we're down here at 20. Are we looking in the wrong space? Are we advertising the wrong way? Using tools. I think TechSEO has a tool where they're trying to make job descriptions more approachable, for lack of better words. But yeah, no, defining where you are, I think, is sort of true to knowing where you need to go. I think if you want to go down a map, you need to know your starting point and go from there. All right, Andrew, anything to? Oh, Allie, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say I think it's using those tools to really understand the availability of the talent in that space is really important, and it's not just important for your HR team or your recruiting team. You have to parrot that over and over and over again in different types of ways in a consultative manner to all of your business line leaders and your frontline hiring managers who are really making the biggest impact to your diversity numbers from a hiring perspective. And to piggyback off what Christina said, I think it's really important for us to think not just about growing them within, but providing the opportunity, right? So the internal mobility philosophy or the guidelines that you have within your organization, when we peeled our numbers, we saw that was one of the highest hiring sources for women and people of color in our business. So we got to double down there because it's working, right? It's actually allowing people to rise up to what Andy said. You look north of the management funnel and you go, ooh, numbers aren't great. What are we going to do? So that's one area you could focus on. I know that's kind of tactical, but I think it's important we talk about it. And the other is these ideas of critical talent pipelines, alternative talent pipelines. So not just interns, but where else are you looking? For example, we partner with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Hiring Our Heroes program, which helps, it's essentially an externship for veterans. Surprisingly, I think people think veterans and they think, I don't know why, I think a lot of people think white male, but surprisingly, the veteran population is extremely diverse, and it allows them to come in and do 12-week internship within your organization paid by the military. And we place them in business lines we know that are growing, and it helps them transfer the skills to what Christina said. I think that's one of the biggest opportunities we have. It's not just experience, folks, it's also the skills. And it's hard to do a comparison, especially with a military resume. So there's lots of ways you can slice and dice it, but I think even we should all give ourselves a little grace. I think if we even start small and start making impacts even in those different business lines, you'd be surprised what that will do over time.
Ellie, I don't know if you're segueing into your items, but were you starting to go into your piece? We can segue.
Oh, if you're ready for me, sure.
Yeah, let's fire away.
Well, I think we all have a lot of opinions about D&I, especially if you've been in the talent space for a long time. And I've been in recruiting for about 20 years, but I've been at my organization for almost a decade. So it's been a really interesting journey to watch people's perspectives change over time and watch demographics change over time. And what I've obviously, it's a very traumatic, sensitive subject and an important subject, Black Lives Matter and everything that's been going on, especially here on the West Coast. I'm really humbled by it because I think it's been a swift kick in the pants to a lot of organizations that were looking at HR and saying, okay, so what are you guys doing about this? Because this isn't an HR problem to solve, it's a business problem. We get to play a part, and that part's important, but I think the onus of diversity, inclusivity, belonging, equity, all of the things, right, that are important to all of us in this function lies with our executive teams, but also lies with all of our employees. So I think we often take the burden of it in human resources. At least I know we sit in meetings quite a bit and go, gosh, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? Instead of holding up a mirror and saying, hey folks, this is what we look like. Are you okay with this? Because you have to meet your business where they're at, and every business is in a different evolutionary pattern. And if you want to make change, if you want to make impact and you're passionate about it, you really need to understand where your company falls from a data perspective, but also kind of an emotional, philosophical level of how they feel about diversity and inclusivity. And I think you had asked us initially, where does your company fall? Do you have an opportunity? Well, until you get your arms around your numbers, you don't know. And likely the only people who are going to get their arms around their numbers and really push that agenda are your human resources people. So that's, for us, I think one of the most important things we did. And it started with recruiting because I think it was easier for us to get our arms around the recruiting numbers than it was everything else that Andy had mentioned and Christina had mentioned, as far as, okay, you've got him here, now what? But now that we've partnered together across our organization, we've been able to look at the whole story and understand we're actually doing a pretty good job at the hiring. We're not doing a great job at the retention. So how do we focus, and where do we invest, and what do we need to do as an HR team and as a business to kind of take us to that next level? Not just benchmarked against our competitors, because in my space, that is not a great baseline for us, but against global competitors, even though we're a 2,000 person, 6-year-old private organization. But we compete for talent with Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Apple. They're all here, and they're all within a 10-mile radius. So we're in a kind of an interesting space for talent.
Interesting. How do you approach recruiting for diversity with those type of tech companies?
Oh, well, I think it actually goes back. It's tough. I'm not going to lie. I had a conversation with somebody and she said, well, Facebook has a ball pit in Seattle. I said, okay, you have a cafeteria? You can't do it apples to apples. It's really tough. But what we found is that because our company, McKinsey in general, our vision is to build a thriving planet, that climate change, that, creating a legacy really, it touched people's hearts. And so that values alignment, I think Andy had mentioned that, looking for values alignment, that's what we look for. And I think when we can tell a story that, makes you more intrigued and interested, we're not just a large internet retailer that's, pushing consumers, nothing wrong with that, by the way. But we're trying to impact climate change. That actually gave us an edge. Not from a diversity inclusivity standpoint, but just from a recruiting talent perspective in general.
Interesting. So I had a conversation with some recruiters back, and I asked, I think the topic was like around your recruiting job and where you worked. And I was sort of asking, just about every company has any amount of employees has a recruiting department or team. It could be one person, but it has basically every company has a need to recruit new employees. So my thing was understanding that every company has a job for a recruiter. Does the purpose or like the product or service of that company inspire you as a recruiter to go recruit there? Like, I love candy, so I want to go recruit for a candy company. Or I love music, so I want to go recruit for a music company. I love my MacBook, so I want to go recruit for Apple. Is that kind of what your line where the purpose of our company, not necessarily the product or service, but the passion of the people at our company, using that as an advantage?
I think so. I'd look to the other panelists to agree or disagree, but I think it's a lot easier to ride. Well, we're calling it the Corona coaster right now, right?
Yeah.
But it's a lot easier to ride the roller coaster of corporate America in your career if you really believe in what your organization's trying to do. And you can get up every morning and go, gosh, I got these meetings and I'm tired, and I got to get kids to school or whatever it is. But I know I'm making an impact. And to me, that's really important as a motivator. And I look for people, both for my team and for our organization, and I believe my talent recruiters do the same. We look for that values alignment. Does that motivate you? Because if it's just money, and that's okay if it is, because everybody's in a different space in their life, and that's a variable comp, right? Total rewards based on lifestyle and life, where you're at in your life. And that's a different conversation for a different day, but that's probably not a good fit for my company. But you could go to Microsoft and do just fine, Not that they don't have a values alignment, inspirational focus, but that's just what we do.
Yeah, getting to the topic of like, does your company have a diversity issue? If you track candidate declines, and I encourage everybody to, if you're sourcing and people are telling you no, to track the reasons why. If you're getting asked back, well, tell me about your D&I program. How does your company have inclusion for people like myself, whoever you may be? If there's not a good response and you're seeing those candidates drop off at that point, there's a sign, right? So that comes back down to, it's a selling point for our company to get the talent that we want. If we have proof, right? Proof is in the pudding to show it, so to speak.
And I think too, when we think about D&I or DEI, I know it keeps evolving, which is great. We need to also think about, how do we operationalize our teams to be able to make the greatest impact. And that's one of the things, I don't know if you guys feel this too, but I feel like we're constantly having the money conversation when it comes to HR. You know, are you fully funded? Do all of these beautiful things, but do it with the same amount of money and the same staff. That's where I go. It's not just an HR problem. This is a business problem. But when you understand your numbers and you really understand the data, and I'm speaking holistically, but for this particular subject, just with talent acquisition, what we found is when we have less recs per recruiter, we have better diversity hiring results.
Interesting.
That's just one, that's just one thing that came out of our data analysis was, hey, when we have less than 15 recs per recruiter, they spend more time sourcing diverse hiring, having strong conversations, consulting in the business. They understand the numbers of the business line they're going into, perhaps put a person into, so they can say, hey, how are you feeling about the diversity and inclusivity of your team right now? I've looked at the demographics. You look pretty heavy here. Is that important to you? But you can't have time to do that if you're slinging 50 recs. Right. So if you want to make an impact, you have to understand your numbers so you can operationalize your function to actually make the impact, if that makes sense.
I've only worked with one recruiting team that a portion of their annual bonus was dependent upon the diversity of their pipeline. So these are just sources, right? They just source, so they didn't have all the recs, they're just sourcing. But they needed to have a 25% diversity for biotech scientists in order to hit that portion of their bonus into it. So they're trying to encourage that effort with money, which is always helps.
It's nice. It'd be great too if it was a performance management goal for the hiring manager who had to make the decision.
That's an interesting point, right? If somehow you introduce spiff bonuses for hiring manager teams, so they saw a little bonus or whatever the case may be, to kind of urge it, or not urge it, but to get it down that direction to see if that would even trigger it. Or if, it's like a good employee referral program. I don't need to offer money. If I have a great company, I'd be happy to encourage it. I think in a lot of places to put it on the radar, you might need to offer a little bit of a stimulus, so to speak. And anything else? Well, go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, can I just expand on your point? You made a really good point about us being prepared to answer the D&I question when it comes from candidates. And I don't know if this is odd or not, but I actually ask that question of candidates at the executive level. If I'm hiring for director level and above, we always talk about D&I, and I ask about their perspective on D&I and sort of some of the things that they've done in past companies to encourage more diversity and inclusion within their departments, which I think is important. Another thing is because I've mainly worked in the entertainment space.
Oh, Christina, you froze. You can hear me. She may have to reconnect. Hey, Andy, let's jump over to your while we get Christina situated again. You want to go over your items?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to focus on making sure that you're doing stay and exit interviews with your diverse people as they are stay obviously while they're still there, but if they're leaving, making sure that you're getting the feedback. I think I'm going to pivot a little bit because we started touching on, several times earlier, it was around how we're going out and finding diverse talent and sourcing them. I'm a little... where I try to take that is sort of the accountability of what are we doing with our employer brand to attract diverse talent to us, and how do we sort of make that pipeline more than a thing where we're just saying to the recruiters, you have the responsibility to go find 25% of your candidates or 30% of your candidates being diverse. That's great, but those people won't stay. Welcome back, Christina. We lost you. So employer branding is going to be such an important thing because for me, my definition of employer branding is what's attractive, credible, and sustainable about your organization. And then what we need to do is take that next step and say, if we have a diversity issue and we want to change the look of our talent pool, then we need to start answering that question of what is that talent pool looking for from us? What are we telling them about us that is going to be attractive, but also credible and sustainable? Otherwise, we just have that retention issue again. And I think what that does in the context of the conversation and the people that we have on this call, it gives the recruiting team the ability to lean in towards the rest of HR and towards leadership and the executives, and say, it's not just about recruiting, it's about what do we like as an organization. I can't sell a story that's not true. I can't sell a story on the website that says, hey, we promote diversity and we bought a couple of images off Getty and it makes us look diverse, but it's not genuine. And so trying to grab hold as a talent acquisition team ownership around employer branding and saying, what, this has to come from the soul of our organization. It has to come from our fabric. And what matters is that ability to attract and retain diverse people there. I think will start to put us in a position to have a greater impact in this area.
I think we can argue that if a company is only looking at hiring diversity data, there probably is an opportunity for D&I in the company. I totally agree with you.
Andy, let me ask you a question around the employment branding piece of it, kind of one piece in that puzzle. Are you being strategic about any type of partnerships that you're doing with external organizations of any sort?
Depends what you mean by that. Yes. So we participate in something called the Manfield Rule. So there's a group called Diversity Lab, and they are helping the legal industry with what is a very strong focus right now. Started with gender, and now it's going more into sort of diversity, equity, inclusion across the whole scope of things. And so that is a very strong partnership that we have. They are providing us with accountability from an external aspect on, are we just looking at our numbers internally, or are we reporting those metrics externally and getting feedback from those and getting external opinions on what we could do better? And so, even right now, I'm working on a project around inclusive job postings. And I'm not just doing that as a team of the recruiters that we have. It's working with them, getting feedback, working with the departments, getting their feedback, and bringing everyone to the table on what does that look like and how can we make these more than just we ran them through an inclusive job posting sort of function on a website and did that give us a result. And so they're a legal industry specific one as far as a partnership goes there, as an example.
Yeah, so like there's nonprofits out there, right, that are kind of focused at building diversity in the workforce, what have you. And I won't name any names, but I will say I'm a little bit disappointed in some of their approaches when it comes to really figuring out how does hiring work. I'll give you an example. We were going after a diversity target group at my last company. It was spot on to what we needed, spot on. And they had a website, they had an organization to it. So, hey, recruiters, this is the group that has the people that we're looking for. But the way they shared their members, or the lack thereof, basically made it a resource that our recruiters couldn't really use. It was kind of like blind asking about things rather than like on a resume database or LinkedIn where you can kind of look at their skill sets. So they had the people we were looking for, but we had no way to go in and identify the ones that were a match for our company. And they wouldn't, when I straight up asked, hey, can I get a spreadsheet of all your members? No, you just look at our website. I can't use your website. My recruiters aren't going to use it. We're missing a great opportunity here. But it didn't go anywhere. Another example a few years back was diversity in software development. And I'm not going to name this group because they're a rather large group, but essentially it was just give people a test and then send out the test results. And that was kind of it. And I just thought there's such a big gap in being able to connect and work with a company to work together as a group rather than just do one thing and hand off the baton. And that would, I just think there's an opportunity for nonprofits to gather up a good cadre of companies and work together to solve a purpose. Ideally would be in a central location because you're most likely to get your next job where you live. Kind of stay local and work together. So that when we talk about the branding piece of it, to me, that's like, hey, find a good, because one company can do it, and if another company does it on their own, another on their own. But if you have a type of collection, I just think it's a win-win for everybody. Haven't seen anything like that yet, but I'm still fingers crossed hoping.
I think, my response to that is, just like in any field, you're going to get organizations or people that partner well and do things well and others that maybe leave space. What I'm seeing from our clients, because we're at law firms, we have clients, they're extending their expectations on diversity to us, and asking for our data to be more public and available. And I would encourage everyone here to do the same and extend accountability out. If you're working with a nonprofit or someone that's not doing things in the way that you think things should be done, then lean into them and say, we think this could be done better. And if you need to take your money or your support in a different direction and continue to look for a partner that is better in that regard, do it, because there's no shortage of groups getting into this right now, or ones that you could maybe work within your industry to find out and partner with your competitors and say, who are you seeing doing good work in this area? We would like to support them too. I don't think when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion and working with these kinds of nonprofits, that our direct competitors should be getting cagey about who they think is doing a good job. This is something we need to all come together on in like sort of one stand together and say, they're doing a great job. So reach out to others that you know in your industry and say, who's working for you? Why are they working for you? And what are they doing well? And then maybe you move your support in a different direction. And I think the more we start to pull support behind the ones who are doing a great job, the more we'll move everyone to say they're being successful, and we'll start moving a needle across an industry or across a broader spectrum rather than one particular nonprofit.
Does anybody know of any type of collective efforts going on between companies, or is it kind of everybody's trying to figure it out on their own?
I know Microsoft has the MSA program, and they're transitioning veterans and teaching them, basic technology. There are some out there, but Sean, you have this big group. You could start the repository. I would love to know what's working for other people. I think that's a great point, Andy. I think we're often all myopic and trying to get through the trenches and everything we're doing, and that it's so important to share that information. There isn't that many talent acquisition think tanks out there. I4CP is a good one. I know Mercer, some others, but it'd be great to hear what's really happening on the ground with people, what's working well.
Yeah, I've started asking people if hey, do you want to work together around numbers? And it goes back to that, hey, I'm at 20%. Is that good or bad? I don't know. To try and compare each other's with the whole understanding that, hey, we got to anonymize the data in some respect. And if you want to tell some person whose yours is, it's like when you went to college, right? And you got, well, back in my day, you go to get your test score, go to the professor's door, he posts everybody's scores, and you look for the last four in your social number. Okay, that's my score. So nobody knows my information, but I can see others. That's kind of an approach, because I know if somebody's numbers aren't good, they're probably not going to want to share them or tell you that they're not good. That's nature of the beast. So kind of knowing where you stand, but yet remaining anonymous. So you can kind of benchmark yourself against certain things. And by certain things, I mean your industry and location, and then leave it at that. But sort of give yourself an understanding. I'd love to get down the diversity of roles in departments and things like that, one step at a time. But that's kind of what I think these conversations ongoing we can slowly get there. It's not one big jump, but a whole bunch of series of little steps. I'm hoping people kind of partake in that conversation to all your points that, hey, this isn't a one conversation deal. Let's go from project to program, right? Where program is ongoing. The discussion continues. It's not short term. Hey, we went way over. I appreciate it though. Another good conversation. I don't think we lost attendees really, but any final comments or points that you want to highlight? Let's just sort of go around robin. Allie, I'll start with you.
Well, just to be respectful, there's a question in the chat from James about sharing the effectiveness of your people platforms. And I would look to my panelists to speak to that. I would tell James mine are all over the place, but quality in, quality out. So, but we do invest quite a bit in our people analytics platforms, and it's been pretty effective, but there is a lot of still some hand tooling, and we measure brand engagement, initial brand engagement for every hire, so we can actually peel the onion and understand where our diversity hires are initially coming in contact with our brand. And we still have to do that by hand and through interview questions and whatnot. So I would say we're pretty tactical in Excel all the way up through kind of some SaaS platforms.
that will be an ongoing, we'll come back to, hey, how are you measuring your information? And what tools do you use? And all things like that. Thank you. Andrew, any final comments?
Sorry, you broke up. You're asking me?
Oh, yeah, Andrew, any final comments? Sorry.
I mean, no, just really good conversation. I mean, one quick thing to Andy's point on just branding and brand development, it's so spot on, and it extends beyond diversity. I think we've all realized, previous generations looked at company name and prestige, and millennials and Gen Z. It's really all about the values of those corporations that they work for. Are they working for a good corporate citizen? And it really is incumbent upon organizations now that, it can't be Getty stock images and smoke and mirrors. There has to be tangible things there that, as recruiting organizations, we can sell to candidates as to, if it's not your favorite product, this is why you want to work for us. Our values do align. So I think, diversity is a great application, but it extends even beyond that.
Excellent. And Andy, any final comments?
Yeah, I would ask people to look at a couple of things. The first thing, extending on what we've talked about, is it's almost like that sort of corporate social responsibility. Where are you putting your money? And not just sort of where is recruiting spending budget, but where is your organization, putting sponsorship dollars and those sorts of things? Are you, sponsoring your director of sales alumni because that's, what he likes, or that sort of thing? And what portion of that is actually investing in the future diversity talent pool, which I think is probably, the direction that we all need to start thinking, is how can we start, if we look at what is that surface number, we talked about surface numbers before, we have a metric that says, this particular, sales, IT, whatever, is only 25% diverse anyway. I couldn't possibly do better because that's all there is. Do something about it. Send your money into the future diversity of that pathway and that pipeline, rather than just spending your money on how do I get the 25%. Be part of something bigger. With time being short, I'll leave it there.
Excellent. And Christina.
Yeah, I just sort of want to piggyback off of Andy E's comment about us holding each other accountable, right? None of us have all the answers, but not only being mindful of what we're doing internally, but what our vendors are doing, what's important to them, what are their value systems. And then for our candidates, before I got cut off, asking them, making sure when we're talking about values aligning, right? Asking them what they've done for D&I at their past companies, especially if they're at the executive level, to make sure that we're perpetuating the value of focusing on belonging and inclusion, not only now, but moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. That was a really fantastic conversation. I hope you also enjoyed it. And with that said, I'm going to let everybody go and enjoy the rest of your week. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for putting this together.
My pleasure. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.